What's up, Movement Masters? It's Sean Mishka, Movement Master and OptimizeMovement.com, coming to you with another Movement Quick Tip. And in today's Movement Quick Tip, we're going to discuss the topic of the technical execution or movement solution change and what may need to be done in order to see this transference into the context of the movement skill being performed in the organic sport environment. Now, when we think about retention and we think about transfer, of course, we know that this is our main goal of movement skill acquisition, especially in regards to technical change. And these ideas of retention and these ideas of transfer are our main indicators that sufficient motor learning has actually occurred. Now, let's imagine, if you will, that you have a particular athlete. You analyze and you break down that athlete's movement skill, and you witness what you believe to be a significant enough compensation that is in need of a technical change. You then address it through specific correctives and other specialized developmental activities being done in the practice setting. And the athlete then is able to take to these quickly and frequently and almost optimally produce that movement skill in practice with that new technique change. Now, you might think it should be good for us to be able to see that then, or it should be good to go, I should say, rather than for us to see that transfer to the sport domain. And we can move on to another aspect of the movement skill then, right? Wrong, in most cases. It may occur, but not always. And it's likely that if you've done enough technique corrective sequences like the one I just mentioned with enough athletes, you will know that it's highly unlikely that under pressure and anxiety and fatigue, or really overall chaos of the sport movement environment, that the athlete then will resort back to the original biodynamic structure of that particular movement skill. Why is this? Well, it's likely because we didn't give that athlete enough time to allow that biodynamic structure of the movement skill to actually stabilize. And until it can stabilize, we can't actually expect it to actualize, or AKA be retained and then actually transfer for where we need it in the sport movement context. First of all, we must note that the length of this process of stabilization, where the desired change now becomes part of how that athlete organizes that respective movement skill, is going to be dependent on a whole host of numerous factors, including the level of original learning that the athlete has attained of that particular movement skill, as well as the overall development and strengths and weaknesses of that particular athlete. Also, the nature of the movement task itself, and then finally, of course, where we expect that movement skill to be actualized. Because of this complex interplay then of those respective factors, this process of actualization is going to be different from athlete to athlete and from situation to situation. But there are a few things that I believe that we can do as sport movement specialists to accelerate this transitional process from stabilization to actualization as we make technical changes, tweaks, and refinement to the movement skill. The first, using more random and variable practice structures more frequently than the use of blocked or constant practice. This, in my mind, will require the athlete to recall and then reproduce that biodynamic structure of that movement skill more frequently from repetition to repetition. On that same note, the use of other means of contextual interference as necessary by changing the motor problem, as we've talked about, so the practice structure becomes one of repetition without repetition. Additionally, then when we start to see that technical change begin to show itself in the practice structure, we can look to test it out a bit by adding additional chaos or variability or speed or intensity. And this, in my mind, will help hit that movement save button, so to say. And finally, we can look to change up our communication and augmented feedback style and frequency, which could allow that athlete to gain greater movement ownership as well as error detection and correction. And I believe just those few tips can go a long ways to ensure that this process of stabilization and then that process of stabilization to actualization occurs more smoothly. So for another movement quick tip, this has been Sean Mishka, Movement Mastery and OptimizeMovement.com. I'll talk to you guys on the flip side. Until then, let's continue to master the art of optimizing movement.